Hello and welcome to An Academy, one-stop destination for civil services aspirants. Welcome to this special session where we are going to talk about the basics of answer, how to go about answer writing. Now, most of you would know the importance of answer writing in order to clear the civil services examination. Now, if let's suppose we are one of those candidates whose ultimate aim has been to just clear the prelims examination in their life, then you don't need to wonder about this. But in case you want to clear the examination, you have to clear the mains. And mains carrying a weightage of around 1750 marks. That is where answer writing skills become very, very important. Now, why is it that you should take a look at this particular video? In this video, we are going to talk about what are the nuances and important areas that you should concentrate upon as a beginner if you are trying to create an answer. And also, when you take a look at a particular question, oftentimes the questions they do include the words like critically examine, justify, comment, discuss, describe, elaborate, elucidate, and so on. Now, while most of us, when we take a look at the question, we just take a look at the subject matter and we go ahead with the answer writing. But that is where we tend to lose marks. Every such answer which is written in a kind of an ignorant fashion tends to lose a substantial chunk of marks and lessens your probability to clear the exam. So in this, we are going to understand the importance and the meaning of these keywords. With the help of these PYQs, we are going to take a look into how to address and approach the question if one of these keywords are used. We are eventually also going to take a look into the fact that how some of the keywords will have a similar kind of an answer, but the similar looking keywords, they need to have a very distinct answer. For example, a discuss and a describe might seem to be very similar, but the answer required by each one of them, and in case of each one of these questions, are going to be very, very divergent. So that is what we are going to cover in this video. If you want to download the PDF of this particular session, you can download it from the Telegram channel and the link which has been provided here. Now, before initiating the discussion, first of all, the basics of answer writing. Let's suppose I am a beginner. I have just initiated the preparation for civil services. Now, when do I initiate writing the answers? Many of the pundits and experts in the market will tell you that answer writing should begin from the first day of the preparation itself. And that is where you have to understand that answer writing cannot happen from the first day of your preparation. Because what is an answer? We are no longer in class 10th or 12th or in our graduation days where a simple crude answer will give us the required marks. The marks in civil services examination, they are hard to get by. But then if you know the process, if you know what to be included, that is when you will attain the marks. Now, in order to attain good marks and in order to be able to create good answers, first thing that you have to follow is the CPT strategy. What is this CPT? So, when you start studying any particular topic or reading any particular subject, first thing that you have to focus upon is building your content, which is the most important part of any answer. Always remember, content is the king. Any answer which lacks content, regardless of how beautifully you present it, does not matter. Content is important. So initially, you should work on developing of the content. Once your content is up to the mark, that is when the role of presentation and your ability to present the answer that comes into the fore. And what do I mean by presentation? Does presentation mean using 5 different colored pens, pencils, glitter, etc.? Absolutely no. When you are writing an answer, your aim should be to attract the attention of the evaluator to your answer for maximum possible duration. Because please understand one mindset of the evaluator, an important mindset. Now, evaluator doesn't know who you are or the struggles that you have been in through your life. Neither will have the evaluator you as standing in front of them arguing that this is what you meant when you were writing the answer. So whatever answer you have written, your marks and the evaluator will judge that writing and will give you marks. And in all probability, the evaluator will not even read the entire answer. So you have to be very clear in that. That regardless of howsoever content you have filled up in a long paragraph in an essay manner, the evaluator is not going to read all of it. So, sir, then what is the need of writing elaborate answer? The need is to force the evaluator's attention onto your answer paper, to ensure that evaluator is forced to look into what you have written at least for 2 to 3 minutes. And how do you ensure that? That is where the presentation comes in. So just the content doesn't suffice, just the presentation doesn't suffice. First work on the content, then work on presentation. And by presentation, we mean diagrams. For example, for answers of geography, every answer should necessarily have a diagram. Then, for example, a flow chart or a bubble chart, right? For example, let's suppose you have to write the impact of deforestation. Now, that impact of deforestation, you can list out in a paragraph manner for the entire page. Or what you can do is you can form a bubble, write about the various impacts. Not only will it save time and space, it will ensure that the evaluator is able to judge your content based upon a simple glance. Again, the aim is to attract the attention of the evaluator. So after you have worked upon your presentation, and this will only come with practice. This will not happen in the first answer itself. Please understand this. If you are a beginner and you want to create good answer, please don't get disheartened if you take a look at the topper's answer and compare it with your answer, because that will be half cooked and half baked. You need subsequent practice over hundreds of questions in order to gain proficiency in answer writing. So with practice, let's suppose you have mastered the content, you have mastered the presentation. After that, it is practice and practice alone, which will take care of the T factor. And T factor is basically the time factor. To ensure that you have written the answer in the designated time. What is the designated time for an answer to be written? The designated time that you will get in a 3-hour session is close to around 8 minutes per answer. Please keep that in mind. That is where it becomes challenging. Because let's suppose for a question I give you 30 minutes. Obviously, you will be able to conjure up all the various points out there in the universe and bring it to the table. But thinking all of those particular perspectives and points within those 8 minutes, that is a challenge. And this again will lead to omissions by your side, where you will fail to bring certain points to the table. Let's suppose you will also enumerate some of the wrong points in the table or in the answer paper. So these mistakes do happen in the initial days. That is where you have to work upon it. So that is basically how to write or how to approach answer writing. So first, work on your content. What if I have just started preparation? In that case, what should I do? If let's suppose I've just started preparation, I don't have enough background of answer writing in my life, and let's suppose I don't have enough content to write a comprehensive answer from a previous year question, then what should I do? Please understand, in the case of answer writing, we oftentimes forget the important word in answer writing, and that is writing. You should always be in a habit of writing. Put pen to paper. The mind to muscle memory, that should be something which should be involuntary. That if I'm thinking of a point, I should be able to jot it down on the paper as quickly as possible. Many of the times you will find that outside the exam hall, the candidates appear to be very knowledgeable. They know all the concepts. But when it comes to answer writing, they are short of content. They don't know what to write, where to write. But they can tell you verbally, but they won't be able to write it. So what will you do of all this knowledge if you are not able to clear the mains exam? So writing is something which is lacking in their life and in their practice. So write something. Let's suppose you have read today's newspaper or the editorial page of the newspaper. Write it in your own words, not the entire editorial itself, but the gist, the basic summary of it. In this particular paradigm, always advisable to prepare topic-based notes of any particular subject that you are studying. For example, let's suppose you are studying the portion of geography. Now in geography, you study about the formation of planet Earth. Now you study about the various concepts, etc. But then eventually compile the formation of Earth, various phases of evolution of planet Earth, the accretion theory and so on, in one piece of paper. close all the other sources of information and write it out of your own memory's recollection. That will not only give you an idea where you are lacking in terms of concept, but will also sharpen your focus and will make you concentrate even harder to recall those points. And that will be the best form of revision and the best form of writing practice. Do this unless and until you have finished a substantial chunk of the content. After that, pick up the PYQs and begin answering. Now, some of the key pointers which have to be kept in mind for answer writing. First is very basic. Always write what is asked and do not write what you know. Now, it might seem very intuitive that why will we write something which is not asked? We always write something which is asked. But that is not the case when you have a preparation beyond a certain level. For example, let's take a look at this previous year question. Discuss the evidences of the theory of continental drift. 10 marker. Now, in this particular question, the ask is simply evidences of continental drift. But you will find most of the candidates, when they have to talk about the evidences, they talk about the evidences in a very short manner, in a very brief manner. Then they will spend all their energy talking about the assumptions made by Alfred Wagner, reason why continental drift was rejected, what were the reasons for the westward drift and the flight away from the poles. Why? Because they are aware about these facts and they simply want to highlight it in front of the evaluator that, look, I know everything. In this particular endeavor, they end up wasting a lot of their time, a lot of their energy. They don't highlight on the important points, and eventually they are in a rush to finish the answer paper as well. So please always restrict yourself to the demand of the question. And for that, identification of the keyword is very, very important, which is the main keyword that needs to be addressed. Now, after this, frame the structure, form a flow. The answer should not appear like a notebook copy that you have made, where you have written everything simply in bullet points. The answer should be descriptive. So here, the answer needs to have a flow. All of us, we know that in an answer, typically, we have three main parts. That is the intro, the introduction, the portion of the body, and the conclusion. Isn't it? Now, generally, when we write the answer, all of them are arranged in silos, separate columns, in the sense that you write intro, which talks about something very differently, body talks about something very differently, and conclusion is independent altogether. So that appears to look like three different answers. It should not be the case. So here, the last sentence with which you finish introduction should be the flow from where the first sentence of the body should start, and the last portion of the body should be the portion from where conclusion should. Let me provide an example for the same. Let's take the same question. Discuss the evidences of the theory of continental drift. What should be the introduction in this? Introduction always has to highlight the main keyword. Whatever is the main keyword of the question, that needs to be highlighted. In this, the important keyword is theory of continental drift. So the introduction will talk about the theory of continental drift. The continental drift theory, which is provided by Alfred Wagner, talks about a possibility where all the lands of the continents were at one point of time unified into a single landmass known as Pangaea, which over a period of time got broken and divided to give rise to the present day shape of the continents and oceans. This is your introduction. Please ensure that your introduction is as brief as possible. The introduction should not extend beyond 25 to 35 words. In the case of 10 marker, 20 to 25 words. In case of 15 marker, at max 30 to 35 words. If let's suppose your introduction is consistently crossing 50 words, 60 words, need to recalibrate and need to start framing introduction. And introduction is very important. This is where the evaluator will form an impression regarding whether you know the content or not. So rather than going very vague in the introduction, address the key point directly in the introduction itself. Now, in the introduction that we have discussed about continental drift, we have mentioned what the theory of continental drift was. Now, immediately following that, when you start the body, that is when you talk about the fact that this theory was postulated by Alfred Wagner based upon a series of evidences which were presented. Now, after that, you have to highlight the evidences. Now, how do you highlight the evidences? One way is simply listing out the evidences: jigsaw fit, similarity of geological rock structures, glacial striations and tillite, placer deposits, fossil evidences, and so on. The other way is that rather than going for a listing straight away, initially itself show the evaluator what you are going to discuss, so that he doesn't have to flip the pages to find whether every point is written or not. So that is where in the body you talk about it is supported by evidences. Supported by evidence. Now, once you have discussed the fact that it is supported by evidences, after that, make a column, evidences, and that is when you basically end up dividing them. You have the visual evidences, that is where you talk about the jigsaw fit, right? Then you have geological evidences, then you have climatological evidences, then after that you have paleontological evidence, right? Now, once you do this, now regardless of how you have described the rest of the answer, evaluator knows that you know the content in greater depth. Only then would you be able to bifurcate this like this or divide it like. Under that, list the various evidences, placer deposits, list about the geological rock structures being similar, list about the glacial formations and the glacial striations, the fossils of the animals. And then after that, in the body, after you have mentioned this kind of a tabulated manner, after that, always use what is the point subparagraph manner. Point and subparagraph. Please do not end up filling paragraphs after paragraphs. That I have struggled so much, with so much effort, I have written 2 pages, evaluator will have to read. No. Evaluator is under no foundation to read whatever text you have written, whether it is boring, whether it is interesting, whether it is knowledgeable, whether it is absolutely ignorant. So that is where point subparagraph is important. What is point subparagraph? Let's suppose I talk about a point of jigsaw fit. So I will write jigsaw fit. I will underline this and then I will write a couple of sentences. If possible, on the sides of this, I will draw a small image indicating the jigsaw fit between South America and West Africa as well. So that is where point subparagraph fashion should be adopted in all the subjects wherever possible to make your answer much more lucrative and attractive to look at. Eventually, once you have discussed all the points along with the relevant images, that is when you come to the conclusion. Now, conclusion also should differ based upon the demand of the question. Now, if let's suppose the demand of the question is that discuss about continental drift, no way forward is required, right? So, in this particular case, what do you say? Conclusion is simply a summarization. Especially in the case of technical topics, conclusion will be a basic summarization. So, when you summarize the answer, how do you summarize the answer? So, as it can be seen, a host of various evidences indicated that continents did drift from their original position. Having said that, the reasons provided by Alfred Wagner could not stand the test of time, due to which the continental drift theory was rejected. However, this drift theory later on paved the way in order for the plate tectonic theory to be postulated. The last sentence is very important. Why? Because the last sentence, that continental drift theory helped formulate the plate tectonic theory as well, puts the entire theory in a positive light. It does not let it remain shadowed by the negative aspect of rejection of CDT. So that is where conclusion, slightly optimistic, and if possible, in a positive note, you should finish. Okay? Now, here, Please understand that if the same question was asked for 15 marks, your answer then would be different. If the same question is for 10 marks, your answer is different. But the same question can also be asked for 15 marks. That is something that you observe in GS paper 1 as well as in GS paper 3. That the same topic is asked for 10 marker also, 15 marker also. If let's suppose the question is asked for 15 marks with the same statement, then your answer will follow what is known as 80 is to 20 or 70 is to 30 rule. What is this 80 is to 20 rule? So let's suppose the question asks about the evidences. So 80% of my answer will meet the requirement of the question. 20% of my answer will be related to the same topic, but maybe not directly asked in the question. And that is for elaborate answers when you have a lot of scope. So in the 15 marker, while 80% of my answer will focus on the evidences provided for continental drift theory, 20% will also focus on the reasons provided, it was rejected, the assumptions made by Wagner, and so on. That is a kind of an unsaid rule of what is expected out of a candidate. The 80-20 rule you also follow for 15 marker, you will find that you start fetching more marks in every evaluation. Now, in the case of answer writing, one of the most important part is practice. Now, having said that, all those who are interested in comprehensive preparation for civil services, we have come up with a lucrative offer to finish all the GS as well as the CSAT portion within a price of 19,999. Along with that, you get 12 months of free extension. Use the code IS English to avail additional discounts and ensure that GS coverage, live answer writing practice, PYQ discussion, whichever educator you want to follow, you can attend their lectures, you can get mentorship, and so on and so forth. So do avail this opportunity as early as possible and use the code IS English. Now, very important part of the answer is introduction. Introduction is a make or break. Depending upon your introduction, the evaluator will look at the rest of the answer or will ignore, give you an average mark. So you don't want an average marks, you want good marks. Now, how do you do that? How do you go ahead with that? So always important in the case of introduction, it has to be brief, not very elaborate, or rather concise. Okay, it has to be very concise, limited. Then after that, introduction. When I say concise, something we have talked about, 25 to 35 words. Then after that, directly attack the main ask of the question, keyword of the question, right? And one another aspect that you need to focus upon, how do you end the introduction? End of intro should have a flow into the body. That is how you begin the body, right? But what if there are two questions or two subparts in a major question? How do you write, or which is the keyword that you attack first? For example, let's take a look at this PYQ. What are the forces that influence ocean currents? Describe their role in the fishing industry of the world. Now, this is a 15 marker question. Now, which is the main keyword here? Think about it. The main keyword here and the key phrase that you have to attack is ocean currents. So your intro, howsoever brief it is, has to talk about ocean currents. So ocean currents are the circulation observed in the oceanic waters where you have regularized movement of water in a set direction throughout the year. That is your introduction. Then after that, in the body, when you start, you talk about that these ocean currents are influenced by various different forces which can be subcategorized into primary force and secondary force. And then you begin talking about that. But that is what your keyword has to be. Now, when do we start answering the second part of the question? After you have finished answering the first part. That is when you enter into the second part. And then you start mentioning that there are various impacts of the ocean currents, including the role in fishing industry. Talk about the upwelling conditions, talk about the meeting of warm and cold ocean currents and the overall impact that can be created. Give examples wherever possible. So that is how you understand and identify which portion to introduce. Let's take another example. Identify and discuss the factors responsible for diversity of natural vegetation in India. Assess the significance of wildlife sanctuaries in rainforest regions of India. Now, what is the key phrase here that needs to be addressed in the introduction? Again, it has got two subparts and two large subparts for that matter. So in the introduction, these kind of questions you will find in GS paper 1 and GS paper 2 very prominently. Also in GS paper 4. So how do you attach or how do you understand which is the main phrase here? Diversity of natural vegetation. Your entire question revolves around natural vegetation. So in your introduction, you begin by writing that varied physiographic conditions of the country along with distributed climatic conditions from north to south and east to west give rise to a wide variety of natural vegetation from tropical dense evergreen to thorny scrubs. That is your introduction. After that, start talking about the body part where you talk about the fact that climatic conditions, variation in rainfall, variation in temperature, the conditions required by each kind of forest types, that is something that you start mentioning thereby. The second part of the question again has to be addressed after you are done writing about the factors responsible for the diversity of natural vegetation. Okay, so these are the things that you can keep in mind, right? How to write, when to begin writing, things to keep in mind, importance of introduction, importance of a flow, and knowing what to write. Not writing whatever we know. There is a minute but a major difference. But then again, important part of the question and the answer writing is knowing the keywords and how to approach and address. For example, in the same question, you will observe that you have keywords like identify, discuss, and assess. So how do we approach these? Very simple. Understand the English meaning of them. Identify. When you identify something, let's suppose when you identify, someone gives you a fruit. Identify this fruit. Now you go for the basic analysis that, okay, this fruit is in orange color, round in shape, it will be an orange, isn't it? Yellowish green, mango. So identify is the basic kind of similarity which is gained or a brief that you gain out of set description. So when we talk about diversity of natural vegetation, identify the factors and then discuss the factors. That is the arrangement of the question. So which are the factors? Temperature and climatic conditions. You have identified those factors. Then you will discuss the variation. Discuss means go into the depth, isn't it? So discuss why this fruit is sweet. So that is when you go into depth. So that is when you basically, so initially you have identified rainfall and precipitation. Then you talk about that how from south to north, from east to west, the amount of rainfall changes, the temperature value changes, and hence we experience this kind of variation in natural vegetation. So that is about identify and discuss. What about assess? What is assess? Assessment is when you have some data in front of you and you are analyzing that data. What is the good point? What is the bad point? Or you are taking out a crux of that data. So that is where the role of assess comes in. So when you say assess, look at the question. Assess the significance of wildlife sanctuaries in rainforest regions of India. So here, the examiner is expecting you to talk about those wildlife sanctuaries in the rainforest regions of India and then assess their significance. So first thing that you have to do, that in the body itself, change of paragraph, start talking about that in India, typically in the rainforest regions, You have abundance of these protected areas from the Nilgiri Biosphere, some parts of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve to the portion of Great Nicobar, all that you mention. After you have mentioned that, then you assess the significance that it helps in biodiversity conservation, it helps in carbon sequestration, it helps in maintaining the water cycle and the moisture balance. This is your assessment, isn't it? Let's suppose somebody shows you a marks card that in class 10th you had scored this is marks. Assess your performance. How do you assess your performance? That okay, in social science I was good, in maths I was not that good. So you bring both sides to the table. So in assess also, you talk about both sides as much as possible. So keywords become very, very important. Overall, in the answer writing and in the type of PYQs that you will see, you will find a variety of keywords out there on the platter. A candidate who does not know these keywords is basically going into the exam hall blindfold, not knowing what to write, not knowing how to write. So that is where understand the meaning of each one of them and how they are different. But there are also some keywords which are slightly similar. So here, let us take a look at few of the keywords and let us understand how could we frame the answer in that particular case. So starting with give reasons. Now this is a simple type of a question framing. Give reason. For example, why was there a sudden spurt in famines in colonial India since the mid 18th century? Give reason. Now, in this particular case, what your intro would be? Intro would be similar. So, in the case of intro, you will talk about that in the 18th century, since the mid 18th century, the region of Bengal and so on suffered from various different cases of famines. You cannot simply contradict this statement. You cannot say in your answer that no, there were no wide scale famines in India. No. The question is giving you a statement that you have to agree to and then provide reasons for that statement. Isn't it? There is no scope of contradiction in this particular part. No scope of critically judging the statement in this particular part. So, in this introduction, you talk about the famines, you talk about then the reason. So, enumeration, listing of the reasons. Here again, in the reason part, you have to basically follow the point subparagraph, points and subparagraph. Okay, that is a template which needs to be followed. Okay, now that is the case of give reason. Very simple, straightforward. Then you have another word which is used, that is trace. That is, trace the rise and growth of socio-religious reform movement with special reference to young Bengal and Brahmo Samaj. Now, this is a straightforward question from the socio-religious reform movement in the portion of modern history, where frequently questions are repeated. The similar kind of questions are repeated in the mains examination also. Now, here it is trace the rise and growth. So, you have to describe in a way, you have to follow each and every event. Tracing an image. What is tracing an image? You have an image, you are simply recreating it. So when you have a question of trace, and let's suppose trace and elaborate, trace and describe, it is recreating the entire episode, recreating the entire event. So how do you create an answer or frame an answer in this? What will be your intro? So in the intro, what is the keyword that you will attack? Straightforward, socio-religious reform movement. Now, socio-religious reform movements mark an important chapter in the reform and the revival of India's nationalist movement and various different, or getting rid of various different social ills faced in our society. A simple generic statement like this can also be your introduction. But basically, ensure that socio-religious reform movement is mentioned there. Then in the body portion, that is where the trace part will start. How do you start that? The genesis of the socio-religious reform movement lay in the Young India movement. That is where you talk about. Then talk about the Brahmo Samaj. So like that, obviously the order can be slightly different depending upon what is the correct chronology, but that is where you talk about the Derosians, you talk about the Brahmo Samaj, you talk about the role of Raja Ram Mohan Roy, you talk about the various other luminaries, all of that. So one by one in a chronological order you mention. In the case of a trace, generally questions are asked in GS paper 1, GS paper 3, generally in GS paper 1 associated with history or associated with the portion of geography as well. And sometimes in IR also, by the way. So in this particular case, when you are framing the answer, chronological recreation of the entire process has to be right. So trace stands for chronological recreation of the event. Recreation and recollection of event. Okay, that is the case of trace. So try framing introduction at least with each of these particular statements. Try framing the brief and all the PYQs that we are discussing. Introduction is something that you can try. Let's see how precise and concise your introduction is. Put that in the comment section. Let's see who is able to put the most apt and the most valuable introduction, to say the least, of all of you. Try doing that because practice is what will make you perfect. The first day, you won't be able to create a perfect introduction or a perfect answer. Only after you have written 20, 30, 40, 50 answers will you start observing a change in the mannerism of your answer writing, in your approach of answer writing as well. Then another aspect is assess, something that we have already discussed. Assess. Take a look at the PYQ. Assess the main administrative issues and socio-cultural problems in the integration process of Indian princely states. Now, when you have these questions, this kind of a question which is free, the evaluator assumes that you have a basic information about the problems faced in the integration of the Indian princely states. You have the idea of that. It is now up to your assessment, right? Just like I told you, that if let's suppose 10th grade mark sheet, I was good in social science, bad in maths, good in English, bad in general science, like that. That is your assessment. Now, what is the intro going to be? What do you write in the intro? Do you start by administrative issues? Do you start by socio-cultural problems? No. You start with the integration process of Indian princely states. That is what your introduction has to be. That just after we gained independence, integration, or you can start with another particular word, immediately after gaining independence, India was faced with an insurmountable task of bringing unity in diversity, and that included integration of large number of princely states, which numbered more than 500 at the time of gaining independence. That is your introduction. In this introduction, you have also mentioned basically that there were problems. Immediately after independence, we faced this issue, isn't it? So that is where you can talk about it. So once you have done that, evaluator knows that you know what is the demand of the question. You are not shooting arrows in the dark. Then in your body portion, start with the genesis of this integration process. That is where you talk about the Fazl Ali committee as well and the various other committees which were set up, right? And then you talk about their findings. Then you talk about the reorganization based upon linguistic basis. All of that you talk about. The administrative challenges which are followed, the socio-economic issues in terms of linguistic basis of classification of states, that also you can talk about. So that is your assessment. Okay. So once you talk about these, that yes, on linguistic basis, this interest group was assuaged, but at the same time, it opened up certain cracks, right? That is your assessment. What is your assessment for any particular issue? Okay. Always in the case of assess, try to conclude with the same tonality as the question is, right? So integration of Indian princely states is talked about. You cannot mention in your conclusion that it was ill organized or it was something which was a mistake. That cannot be your stand. If that is your stand, keep it in the closet, back in your home, but not at the exam hall. So that is where, in the conclusion, despite the numerous challenges that a young independent country faced, due to and owing to a general public consensus and coming together of political opinions, we managed to integrate what were hundreds of princely states into one united India, which stands above everything else. So, like that, you can, from the quotation, you can form the conclusion. That is the case of assessment or assess. Then you have something which is known as comment. Now, comment oftentimes is similarized with justify as well. But comment needs a different approach. In the case of comment, you have a statement based question where a statement will be put forward in front of you. A statement will be put forward. And then you are supposed to write about that statement, elaborate the statement. Now, you can choose to agree or disagree. But then always follow the general tone of the question. Tone of the question should be kept in mind. So, follow the tone of the question at least for 70% of the answer. Okay. For example, comment on the resource potential of the long coastline of India and highlight the status of natural hazard preparedness in these areas. First things first, what will be my introduction? Will my introduction talk about natural hazards? Will my introduction talk about resources? No. My introduction will talk about long coastline of India. That India is a maritime power blessed with a land boundary of more than 7,000 kilometers. That's it. That is my introduction. Now, this large or the long coastline is blessed with various natural resources and teeming with biodiversity. I have described about the natural or the long coastline as well. Now, here, if you take a look at the tonality of the question, I told you follow the tone of the question. What is the tone of the question? The question tells you that India has got a long coastline. Now, by looking at the question, you can infer that India's coastline is rich in natural resources, but India's coastline is also prone to natural hazards, isn't it? So, majority of your answer has to stick to this. Your answer's approach cannot be that no, despite having a large amount of or long coastline, India doesn't have any natural resource. It would have been good if India had some gold and platinum along the beaches as well. That cannot be your approach. That is not what the question is asking. So comment on the resource. So basically, in this, what is required, you highlight the importance of various different resources, not only terrestrial, but even maritime resources when it comes to the coastal areas. Then also talk about the challenges. For example, in the coastal area around the Konkan belt, you have abundance of minerals like iron and iron ore. But the eco-sensitivity of the region of the Western Ghats provides a kind of a restriction in terms of mining and extraction. Then talk about the fact, for example, across the Kerala coastline, you have large amount of monazite sands which are consisting of elements like thorium. But then again, large scale mining has led to coastal erosion which has impacted. So comment means that you can hold both sides of the argument. That is the case of comment. Eventually, what your take is, agree or disagree, that will be up to you, but you have to, in a way, validate your statement. So that is where, despite the challenges, India indeed is blessed with a very abundantly resourceful coastline, and we need to ensure the criticality of the biodiversity and the importance of the environmental impact in order to extract the minerals, and we need to take the local indigenous community along with us in order to ensure their full participation rather than their elimination. So, like that, you can justify and move ahead with the answer. Okay. Now, highlight the status of natural hazard preparedness. So highlight. So in this, assessment is not required. That no, it is not good, it is not bad, right? A kind of critical analysis is not required. Highlight. What is the status of natural hazard preparedness? So we have early warning systems in the case of cyclones. We have the naming of the cyclones, which is done. Then we basically have the warning systems for tsunami alert, which is also generated. So this is where natural hazard preparedness comes in. The National Disaster Management Authority has issued certain guidelines, right? So all these basically talk about the natural hazard preparedness. So here you simply have to highlight. Eventually, the final portion of the conclusion has to talk about the benefit of the long coastline or the disadvantage. It makes us vulnerable to terrorist attacks and natural disasters as well. So that is where the comment portion comes. Take a look at another question. The states in India seem reluctant to empower urban local bodies both functionally as well as financially. Comment. Now, do you have to completely agree with the statement? Do you have to completely disagree with the statement? No, you don't. So here, when you talk about this particular statement that states in India seem reluctant to empower urban local bodies, both functionally as well as financially, how do you start your intro? Which is the portion that you start your intro with? The intro has to be started targeting urban local bodies, right? Urban local bodies, which forms the base of democratic decentralization in our country, are very important not only to ensure people's representation but also their interest. Like that or any other kind of introduction that you give in polity, you can begin with that. But your introduction has to talk about urban local body. After that, when you start writing the body, that is where you discuss about that whether the states they are reluctant to provide financial and functional role or not. You have to agree with the statement for at least 70% of the answer. You have to agree that and you have to give examples to, in a way, cement your case as well. That yes, as was seen and as has been seen in the various different states like Bihar, the Panchayati Raj elections are delayed for more than 6 years and so on, just in order to ensure a political hemsmanship which is penetrated even in the region of the urban local bodies. Like that, you provide the examples. However, there are certain instances where the state government has been more than ready, or, however, the judiciary has come up with certain guidelines. Like that, you can provide the counter narrative. That is the freedom provided to you under the keyword comment. Comment provides you with a kind of a freedom. You can swing slightly both ways, but 70% of the answer directed towards the tone of the question. Okay? Now, discuss and describe. Both appear to be very similar, but both are very different. Discuss. Discuss again means bringing pros and cons to the table. Describe, however, is simple elaboration. Whatever you are talking about, simply elaborate it. Elaboration. Discuss is more of an analysis. Okay? Both positive and negative aspects. For example, discuss the meaning of color-coded weather warnings for cyclone-prone areas given by India Meteorological Department. The question of geography. Yes, paper 1. Now, in this, the keyword mentioned is discuss. Now, had this question be describe the meaning, would our answer be the same? No, answer would have been different. But first of all, what will be the intro? The intro would be that color-coded warning. In order to increase the awareness and reduce the losses caused by natural disasters like tropical cyclone, the IMD has come up with easy to identify color-coded warnings, which vary from green to red. That is your introduction. You have talked about color-coded weather warning, right? Now it is discuss. So when you have the use of the term discuss, in that particular case, When you talk about the body, you talk about also, you basically give a description of the color coded warning systems which are there and their role as well. Right? What is their role? Easy identification, increased awareness, give the example of various different sad eventualities or calamities which have happened because enough warning was not given. So, like that, you have to discuss. Discuss requires you to go into the depth. If the question had been simply described, your work would have been finished just by talking about that, okay, this is when you have green, nothing to worry about, red, calamity lies ahead, ready for early evacuation, like that. So, like that, your answer will differ. In describe, simple enumeration or elaboration of what is asked. In discuss, go into the depth, meaning, role, implication, everything you talk about. That is discuss. Same is the case with analyze as well. So, discuss in that manner is very similar to that of analyze, and describe is similar to elaborate. Okay? Now, another example. Describe the characteristics and types of primary rocks. Now, in this particular case, talk about the primary rock systems. What are primary rocks? Igneous rocks. Right? Describe the characteristics. They don't have the presence of fossils, plant and animal remains are not to be found. Uniformity of texture, depending upon where they are found, extrusive, intrusive rocks, mafic, ultramafic, and felsic rocks. The mafic rocks and ultramafic rocks, highest density, darkest of the color, olivine, etc. You talk about them. Felsic, there the impact is also created by the air bubbles trapped in the magma as it comes out. Low density, lighter in appearance, rich in silica. So you are describing the characteristic of each and every type of primary rock, the variations of that. Had there been discussed in this particular type, then you would have gone into the depth, right? The types. So when you were to discuss the types, why you have larger grains in terms of, let's suppose, the intrusive igneous rock, why you have smaller grain size in the case of extrusive igneous. That is something you have to write in discuss. That is not something you necessarily have to write in describe if you have enough points. So discuss goes into the depth, describe, elaborate the same thing in as detailed fashion as possible. This is the brief differentiation that you can find online as well. So when you have described, so present factual details in an organized way, right? Depth required, basic to moderate. Inform or outline features, that is the ultimate goal, and neutral or factual will be the tonality of your answer. But when you have the keyword discuss, examine all aspects. Analysis, that is the requirement here. Go into the depth. Explore the implications or all the other arguments. It has to be, the answer has to be analytical, the answer has to be. Okay? Discuss gives you much wider horizon. Just like comment gave you a wider and a broader horizon, same is the case with discuss. Then examine. Examine again, look into both sides of the argument. First, explain the argument, then judge at the both sides. So, examine the potential of wind energy in India and explain the reasons for their limited spatial spread. Now, do we have a good potential for wind energy or do we have a limited potential for wind energy? That is what you have to examine. When do you examine? When you know the details. When do you know the details? If you know the climatological factors, if you know the physiological factors, you know that the coastal areas, they are confronted with very large areas of water body spanning for hundreds and thousand kilometers. So the wind speed is quite significant. And that wind speed helps us generate offshore as well as onshore wind power, particularly in the coastal states, the island nation and the island states, the island territories. The potential is very high. But at the same time, owing to variation in wind pattern, owing to limited wind movement in the continental areas, that wind power cannot be utilized to the same extent in the inland regions, in the northern part of the country. This is you examining both sides of the argument. That whether wind energy in India really has that high potential or not. That is the examine. Okay, look into all the details, analysis of the details. Detailing is important. Okay, and in this, deeper, the analysis has to be deep. Deeper analysis is required. Okay, so that is the case of examine and the requirement of the term examine. Then account for. Account for is simple like enumeration, list, etc. Enlist and so on. So this is again something account for is mostly to be found in GS paper 1 and GS paper 2. Examine, however, is found in GS paper 1, GS paper 2, sometimes GS paper 4 as well, in ethics question as well. Whereas when we talk about account for 1 and 2. So account for the legal and political factors responsible for reduced frequency of using Article 365 by the Union government since the mid 1990s. Question in basic crux is asking you whether you know about the SR Bomai case or not. Mid 1990s, 1994 SR Bomai case came. So question is asking the candidates that account for the legal and political factors why you have a lesser utility of Article 356 post mid 1990s. So account for means list, enumerate. So this is simple as listing or describing or enumerating. So in this, the analysis required is moderate depth. For each point, you do not need to go into greater depth. Okay? Analysis requires you to go for a moderate. What will you write in the intro here? Let me know in the comment section below. Let me see if we are able to frame the intro within 25 words, or this is 15 mark. So let's see within 30 words if we are able to fix a good intro. Then elaborate and elucidate. Now, again, both of them are similar but varied. Elucidate. Elucidate is the word in itself is framed from the term lucid, simple, right? So elucidate is where you explain what is asked in the simple language. You break down the question into simplistic tonality and you explain that. That is elucidate. Simplified explanation. Simplified explanation. I will give with and we will talk about the examples as well. Whereas when we talk about elaborate, different. Elaborate requires you to go into the depth, deeper analysis. And also talk about perspectives associated, right? Perspectives. That's it. That is social factors, economic factors, any other factor that you can correlate or interrelate, that has to be talked about in elaborate. But elucidate, simplified explanation. So here, moderate depth required. Greater depth is not required. For example, let's take a look at the two PYQs. Why is India considered a subcontinent? Elucidate is not there. Elaborate will be. Why? Because for this you need greater depth, analysis. Why is India referred to as a subcontinent? Now, from north to south, from east to west, the physiography changes quite distinctively. Loftiest of the mountains, rainiest of the places, to the driest of the deserts, to the islands which are isolated, we have it all. The climatic conditions change every few kilometers. the linguistic diversity, the ethnic diversity, the racial diversity, that is, again, which is unparalleled across the world. So within that sub-region, India actually includes various different races, ethnic groups, the traditional following religions, cultural diversity, and so on. That is why it is a subcontinent. Then you have the deeper analysis that you go to the way of life, the clothing patterns, the feeding habits, talk about the agricultural produce, talk about the natural vegetation, talk about the human factor. Everything is varied. So, whatever is something which makes up a continent is diversity, something which is included in a small land mass, hence a subcontinent. So, while writing the answer, you have to examine the socio-cultural factors as well, historical factors as well, geographical factors as well, environmental conditions as well. So, that means you are elaborating the statement, elaborate it, expand it in terms of perspective also. But then elucidate. Elucidate the relationship between globalization and new technology in a world of scarce resources with special reference to India. Now, in this introduction has to talk about globalization, right? Or introduction in this case can also focus on new technologies. So, here, elucidate the relationship between globalization and new technology in a world of scarce resources. So here you talk about the fact that how, due to globalization, the world is getting shorter and the trade which goes on makes up for the shortfall of any commodity in a region owing to the faster modes of transportation, the cheaper mode of transfer of raw materials, and marketing of finished goods. So that is where highlight and elaborate your answer or talk about your answer with the help of examples. Right. So in this question, elucidate is used. Simplify and break down the word of globalization. What do you mean by new technology? What do you mean by scarce resource? All of that you break down. Lucid language, simplified explanation, moderate depth, elucidate. Here, if elaborate would have been given, you would, let's suppose, elaborate the relationship. Then you have to talk about the push and pull, the implications of the new technology as well. But elucidate, not required. Moderate depth, you need to. Okay? Take a look at other PYQs also. You will be able to understand that in a better manner. Critically analyze or critically examine. Now, this is again something which you find in certain questions in GS paper 2. GS paper 2 is where it is most often repeated, sometimes in GS paper 1 as well. In this, when you write the conclusion always gains a direction of way forward. In most of the cases, in 99% of the critically examine, critically evaluate cases, the conclusion gains a shape or morphs into a way forward. So, impact of digital technology as a reliable source of input for rational decision making is debatable issue. Critically evaluate with suitable examples. So when you have a question which talks about critically evaluate or critically examine, the approach has to be similar. First of all, what is the statement of the question? Statement is something that you have to analyze or you have to break it down, right? So statement is something on which elaboration will be required. You elaborate it. Now then, you agree with the statement, you disagree with the statement. Disagreement is a must. Critically evaluate. Criticism is required, right? So in this particular case, after you have done with the elaboration, after that, is it true that the case of impact of digital technology as a reliable source of input for rational decision making is debatable? Is it true that digital technology is not a rational source of input? So there, talk about the fact that there are leakages, there is duplication, isn't it? At the same time, you have to disagree, critically evaluate. So how do you disagree? E-governance becomes a vital tool of connectivity, right? Talk about the jam trinity, Jandhan, Aadhaar, mobile trinity, how it has stopped the pilferages and losses and leaks which happened in various stages of governance. Talk about those in detail. And eventually, When you analyze and highlight both sides of the argument, just like in the case of comment, in the comment also you have to take a stand. In this also take a stand, right? That despite all the challenges with digital technology, it is still one of the best methods or mediums in order to carry forward and make the governance inclusive, right? So like that, you can go into the conclusion. Conclusion in most of these, in all of these, particularly critically analyzed, should gain a positive tonality, optimistic positive tonality. That is where the evaluator judges your overall personality as well. Okay? Now, there are certain terminologies where similar approach is required. Now, comment and justify. They might appear to be similar, but in comment, the difference is take your own stand. Own stand. In justify, agree with the answer question. With the question. Okay? Then enumerate or list down. Simple listing down. No greater depth, moderate to shallow depth analysis. Assess or analyze. Here we know that moderate to deep, the assessment is required. Illustrate, demonstrate, it is similar to a kind of elucidate, right? So that is where you are highlighting what is there in the question statement with example. So that is again very similar to elucidate. Examine or evaluate, look into both sides of the argument. Both sides of the argument. Okay? If there is evaluate, then take a stand. Take a stand. But if it is simply examine, need not take a stand in that particular case. Okay? You can simply highlight both sides of the argument, write a way forward kind of conclusion. So this is basically the crux of all the major keywords that you find to be present in the questions that UPSC throws at you in the main section. Understanding them and the basics of answer writing, even though most of us, we think that we know all about answer writing, that is the toughest part. But most important step in answer writing is to begin writing. That is the most important. So today, I ask you that of the various different PYQs that we have taken a look into and we have glanced into, just analyze how you could have framed the introduction and what is the demand of that particular question. The more number of questions that you glance through, better clarity you will gain regarding how to approach these. Very vital if you want to clear the civil examination. So let us take a look at the introduction in the comment section. I hope to see some of the good introduction out there. Having said that, if you have liked this particular content, if it has added some amount of value to your existing knowledge, put that in the comment section and don't forget to click on the like, share and the subscribe button. Till we meet again, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.